القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآيات لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولهم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم ما لو شاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مركزنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا موزرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنا يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مزيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمر نكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أن خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوب ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند موزرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون وسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم अब आप लोगों से अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद व जल फरम अब आप लोगों से गुजारिश एक सूरह फातिहा अपने अपने महरूमीन के लिए और तमाम मोमिनीन मुमिनात मुस्लिमीन मुस्लिमात ख़ुसूसन हमारी इस मस्जिद में जिन जिन लोगों ने बुनियादों में हिस्सा डाला है खुदा उनकी मग़फ़िरत फरमाए उनके दर्जात को बुलंद फरमाए एक सूरह फातिहा अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली व आले मोहम्मद बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम अल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन अर्रहमानिर रहीम मालिकि यौमिद्दीन इय्याका नअबुदु व इय्याका नस्तईन सिरातल मुस्तक़ीम सिरातल लज़ीना अनअमता अलैहिम बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम क़ुल हुवल्लाहु अहद समद लम यलिद वलम यूलद वलम यकुल lahu कुफुवन अहद बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम क़ुल हुवल्लाहु अहद समद लम यलिद ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل. السلام عليكم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم. Can I please request all of you to recite Surah Al-Fatiha once, 3 times Surah Al-Ikhlas for all our Maghribayn. صلوات محمد وآل محمد.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد صل على محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله، بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال إن الله اصطفاه عليكم وزاده بسطة في العلم والجسم، والله يؤتي ملكه من يشاء، والله واسع عليم. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The story of Talut alayhi rahmah that's mentioned in the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah is a phenomenal story. The reason being is because it is a story that has a number of moral lessons behind it. Spiritual, akhlaqi, theological lessons, all associated with the message and the story of Talut alayhi rahmah. So in tonight's discussion, let's go through the story of Talut that's presented within Surah Al-Baqarah and see how that is very well connected with the story and the events and the revolution of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the 10th of Muharram on the day of Ashura. and what the connection is between what happens in history and how it repeated itself in the time of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. So when you refer to the story of Talut, you find that Talut is one of those personalities that he is not only mentioned within the Quran, but he's mentioned within the Kutub al-Samawi that have come before as well. In the Torah he's mentioned, as well as in the Bible too. In the Bible he goes by the name of Saul, or Saul, a king that used to have dominion over the people of the Bani Israel, over the Jews of his time. He was a remarkable personality. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reverberates the same story, mostly the same story within the Holy Quran. Some people may come forward and say, well, does the Holy Quran copy that content from the Bible? Because it seems that when the Bible mentions a story of a certain personality, the Quran mentions the same story as well. So someone may come and argue and say, and many have, saying that the Quran has copied many of the materials from the Bible and the Torah. The Quran itself comes forward and says, no, that's not the case. History is usually the same, isn't it? So what's mentioned in the Torah and the Injil, that can be mentioned within the Quran as well. But the Quran is a book that corrects most of the information that is presented within the Bible and the Torah. What do you mean that it corrects the contents of the Bible and the Torah? Well, when you refer to the biographies of certain personalities, mostly prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that are mentioned within the Bible, you'll find that the Bible approaches their biographies, approaches their identities with a bit of deficiency as well. For example, we discussed the biography of Sulaiman alayhi salam a few nights ago. Sulaiman within the Bible is seen as a man who was powerful, but at the same time had many deficiencies within his life. Likewise, his father Dawood was a king, David, he was a king over his kingdom, but of course he was a person of deficiency as well. Sulaiman was a powerful king, but he was what? He was subdued by his wealth. He was somewhat attracted by the wealth of this world. Likewise, Saul or Talut alayhi rahmah, the Bible depicts him as a great king, but there are many deficiencies associated with his story. When the Quran comes forward and presents the biography of Talut, specifically that occasion in his life, what it does effectively is it deletes all of the deficiencies mentioned in the Bible with regards to his identity. The Quran praises him and makes sure that the readers of the Quran come to understand and acknowledge that Talut was a fabulous, was a phenomenal personality within human history. They say that after the demise of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, after Prophet Musa passed away from this world, when he passed away from this world, prophethood was inherited by his successors. Yusha ibn Nun was the successor of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. It wasn't his brother Harun. Harun, they say, passed away when Nabi Musa was alive. Yusha ibn Nun then took over the responsibility of prophethood. Before Yusha ibn Nun, they say that Nabi Musa alayhi salam, when you examine his biography, one of the greatest things that he did was he freed and liberated the people, the Bani Israel, from the clutches of Fir'aun. They say that Fir'aun, the power he had over his people, he came forward in public and he said, Ana Rabbukum al-A'la, that I am considered to be your greatest Lord. We all know the story of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. He goes towards another land, he marries the daughters of Shu'aib for 10 years, he comes back towards the kingdom of Fir'aun. There's a beautiful point here. When he comes back to the kingdom of Fir'aun, he comes back as a prophet. He comes towards Fir'aun and he says to Fir'aun that I have come to present the message of Islam. Submit to the one true God. Fir'aun was a vicious person. He was hard-hearted. Killing is something that he was very fond of. Persecution, punishment, torture, all of these things, Fir'aun was very known for this. They say that one day Nabi Musa turns to Allah, he says, Ya Allah, free my people from the clutches of Fir'aun. Destroy Fir'aun and his kingdom. They say that Allah answers the dua of Nabi Musa, according to one narration, 10 years later. According to another narration, 40 years later. As in, don't think that Nabi Musa alayhi salam comes back to Egypt, confronts Fir'aun, and then within a short frame of time, Fir'aun chases him in the Red Sea, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroys Fir'aun by closing the sea. No. According to some narrations, that happened 40 years later. 40 years prior, Nabi Musa turns to Allah. He says, Ya Allah, free my people from the clutches of Fir'aun. Today, many of us, we turn to Allah with our du'as. And many of us will come forward and say, Allah does not answer my dua. Why is it that Allah doesn't answer my dua? We can't figure out why Allah is not answering our dua. Then some of us were convinced by the waswas of shaitan. That shaitan says to us, look, Allah is not answering your dua. Allah is not answering your dua because maybe perhaps He doesn't exist. So we move away from Allah. We move away from Islam. We develop this sense of hatred towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we move away from Him. Why? Because Allah is not answering out. Allah says, I will not. It's not the case that Allah is not answering your dua. Allah is waiting for the right moment to answer your dua. Every dua of the mu'min is answered. This is a promise by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He says in the Quran that when my ibad call out to me, I will answer their dua, but I will not answer it immediately if it's not in the maslahah of that person, if it's not in the benefit of that person. Nabi Musa, he prays to Allah, but then Allah answers his dua either according to one narration 10 years later, another narration 40 years later. Fir'aun is now destroyed. When Fir'aun is destroyed, Musa alayhi salam liberates the Bani Israel, and they all come towards the fold of Islam. There's a lot of ups and downs in the story of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. Yes, all of that is mentioned in the Holy Quran. But the point being is when you refer to the riwayat mention that the Bani Israel, after being freed from Fir'aun, were living with great blessings. Allah blessed them. Allah gave them many ni'amat, many bounties. Many of the special blessings of Allah were showered upon the people of the Bani Israel. And they lived lavishly. إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. They suffered for many years under the kingdom of Fir'aun. But now when they were freed from Fir'aun, Allah blesses them with many bounties. They live happily. Many of them were affluent and wealthy. They were religious, spiritual. They followed the message of Musa alayhi salam. They followed the Sharia of Musa. As long as they were alive and they followed the message of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, Allah continued to shower them with that mercy. When Nabi Musa passes away, prophethood goes into the hands of Yusha ibn Nun. Again, the people then followed Yusha ibn Nun. He served and he guarded the message of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. After Yusha ibn Nun, the next prophet then took on the responsibility. One prophet after another, yes, the Bani Israel began to follow them. The narrations explain that many decades later, eventually the people, the Bani Israel, moved away from the religion of Musa alayhi salam. They became irreligious. Many of them began to commit sins. And those who did not commit sins, when they saw people in their nation, in their community, in their societies committing sins, they did not stand up and perform Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. Silence is what? Is when you don't have an issue with the people committing sins in the community. So the majority of them remained silent. The narrations say that majority of the community, what happened was they began to live a life of sin. Many of them began to live a life of licentiousness, where they disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala openly. And they did not care. Allah sent them prophets one after another, but they would not listen to the words of the prophets. The prophets tried very hard to try and bring them back towards the Sharia of Musa, to instill within their hearts the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the people outright rejected the message of the prophets. What happened when they moved away from the religion of Islam? The narrations say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the special blessings that He showered them with, He stopped. The bounties, the blessings that the people of the Bani Israel were witnessing in their lives, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stopped blessing them. How did Allah stop their blessings? They say in the nearby empire, there was a rise of a nation. In the lands of Philistine, in the lands of Palestine, a cruel government was formed. A ruthless empire was formed, which then oppressed the Bani Israel. So they came towards the lands of the Bani Israel and they subdued them. So Bani Israel, they had their own civilization, but the second empire began to torment them, began to persecute them. The Bani Israel were victims of this new government, this new superpower that was living just a few countries away. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now punishes the Bani Israel for their movement away from the religion, from righteousness, by being subdued by a superpower. They witnessed and they were victims of the oppression of this new government for many, many decades. Until one day they had enough. According to the ayat of the Holy Quran, they say that this new government, what would happen is they would enter the lands of the Bani Israel and they would subdue the women, they would abuse the women. Yes, they would kill the children, they would kill the men. They would seize all of the assets of the families, they would destroy the houses, burn the crops. This is the different forms of manifestations of oppression that they used to witness. So the Bani Israel, they were subjugated for so many decades. They came towards the prophet of the time. The prophet of the time goes by the name of Samuel. In the Bible, there's a whole chapter, the chapter of Samuel. He was one of the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the prophets of the Bani Israel. Very old man, very wise prophet of Allah. They came towards Samuel. They said, Ya Nabi Allah, we've had enough. We want help now. We've been oppressed and subjugated for so many decades. We need to rise against this power and we need to fight them. Because we're tired of seeing our women taken. We're tired of seeing our children killed, our crops being destroyed, our houses being destroyed, our men being killed for no valid reason. Samuel turns to them, very wise man he was. He turns to them and he says, what are you asking for? They say, choose amongst us a king who can lead us into battle to fight the oppressive government, the oppressive superpower. Samuel turns to them and he says, if I was to choose a king from amongst you, when things get tough and you're asked to perform jihad, you won't perform jihad. You won't fight for your lives and the lives of your kingdom. You'll turn the other way and you'll run away. They turned to Samuel and they said, no, on the contrary, if you tell us that jihad is wajib, we'll fight because it's wajib from the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll defend our nation and our people. We've had enough of all the different types of oppression that we're facing. Choose from amongst us a king. They insisted and insisted and insisted. Samuel turned to them and said, fine, I'll communicate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I'll see what Allah has to say in this affair. They say Samuel, he goes into his private chambers in his home, in his place where he performs ibadat and so on and so forth. He communicates with Allah. Allah sends him wahi. He says, Ya Samuel, O Samuel, go amongst your people and tell them that I appoint Talut over a king over them. Talut is now officially appointed as a king, not a prophet, as a king, a political king over the people. Make this announcement to the people. There was a problem though. What was the problem? The problem was that no one knew who Talut was. Samuel himself didn't know who Talut was. He says, Ya Allah, who is Talut? I've never seen him before. Perhaps you can give me a description as to who this person is. How high he is, how does he look, what are his features, from which lineage does he come from. And then when I make this announcement to the people, then I can indicate that this person is Talut and I can formally introduce them to the people. Allah says, don't worry. Right now, Talut is on his way to you. He says, fine. Now let's shift our narrative from Talut's perspective. They say Talut was a son of a farmer. His father was a farmer, old man, sick. Talut himself was a farmer as well, and he was a shepherd. Because he was a son of a farmer, he was a fakir. He wasn't someone special. He wasn't from, for example, the hierarchies of society, from the higher echelons of society. Talut in his daily life, he used to look after the crops, he used to look after the lands that he was mending. He used to look after, for example, the cattle and the sheep and the camels and whatnot. And he would look after his father. That was his day job. Whatever produce grew, that's what he would feed from. And he would make very little money throughout the day. They say one day, Talut, as he's mending his farm, one of his sheep or a few of his sheep disappear. They escape from the area that they're in. He looks everywhere for these sheep. Now, for a person who is a fakir, for him to lose a few sheep is a big deal, isn't it? Even losing one sheep, it's losing profit. And he needs to look after these sheep. Otherwise, he won't be able to look after his father. He won't be able to look after his family. So he begins to look for his sheep or his sheeps. Where are they? Where have they gone? He searches this part of his land, that part of his land. He searches everywhere. He can't find it. So he comes to his friend, his companion. He comes to his house. He tells his friend, he says, look, I've lost a few sheep. Come help me find them. It's not like you have anything better to do. So pack your things, come, let's go on a journey. Let's look for my sheep. So his companion and Talut, they both go looking for the sheep. They come out of the city, they go into the desert lands, they're searching everywhere for these sheep. They travel until they come to a nearby city. So his friend, when he sees the sign of the name of the city, he turns to Talut, he says, look, we've been searching for your sheep for a number of days. Let's come enter the city because I know that there is a prophet of God, Samuel, Nabi Allah, he lives in the city. Let's go visit him. Samuel is connected with Alim al-Malakut. Let's ask him, where are our sheep? We're in need of our sheep. Huh? Because he can communicate with Allah through wahi, he'll tell us where exactly the location of our sheep are. And of course we'll get the barakah of visiting the Prophet of Allah. We get to perform his ziyarah. So it's a win-win situation. Talut says to him, he says, that's a beautiful idea. They go in, they enter the city, they come to the house of Samuel, the Prophet of God. They enter the presence of Samuel. The friend, the sahib of Talut introduces himself. I am Fulan ibn Fulan. And Talut introduces himself. He says, I am Talut. When he mentions who he is, they say that Samuel is now shocked that Talut has literally come towards him. This is a man who's been appointed by Allah to be a king over the people. So Samuel, he listens to the plight of Talut. Talut says to him, he says, look, my father is very sick. He's very old. I have to mend him. I have to look after him. I have to look after my other family members. I had these sheep, but they escaped from my land. If you can tell me where these sheep are, it would do us a great favor. So he asks for help. He says, if you can tell us where these sheep are, we'll leave you alone and then you can get back to what you're doing. Samuel, when he listens to the cries of Talut, he turns to Talut. He says, look, Talut, first of all, don't worry about your sheep. Your sheep, right now as we speak, they're on their way back to your father's farmland. As we speak, they're entering the farmlands of your father. So don't worry about your sheep. There are greater affairs that we need to speak about. Talut says, what? What is it? He says, I have been given revelation from Allah. Allah has appointed you as a king over the Bani Israel. Now you can imagine the scenario. You can imagine the scenario that plays out between Talut and Samuel. Talut's thinking to himself, I've just come to just ask where my sheep are. And all of a sudden, I'm promoted to be a king over the Bani Israel. I said, what's going on? Samuel tells him, Allah has chosen you to be a king over the Bani Israel. Forget about your sheep. Forget about your past life. You are now the king over the Bani Israel. This is a command from Allah. Talut was a believer, a righteous man. He says, well, if this is a revelation from God, how can I deny it? So he accepts. He says, fine, okay, I'll take on this responsibility. If Allah thinks that I'm capable of this potential, then I'll take on this responsibility. Samuel then appoints a day. He comes forward in public and he tells the Bani Israel. In public, he gathers all of the people. They congregate. And then he says to the Bani Israel, he says to them, you came to me for help. You asked me to appoint a king from amongst you. Allah has revealed to me that Talut is a king amongst you. I am officially inaugurating Talut as a king. Come and give your bay'at to him. When he did this, all of a sudden there was an outcry amongst the public. How can Talut be a king over us? Baba, you came to Samuel. You asked him to choose a king over you. Samuel has chosen a king over you. Now they oppose the decisions made by Samuel. They said to him that we cannot accept him to be a king over us. Why? The Quran gives us the reason that they used. They justified in their minds that this was a valid reason. They came to Samuel and they said, who is Talut? We don't know who Talut is. He is a son of a farmer. He doesn't have power, he doesn't have influence, he doesn't have fame, he's not from the higher rankings of society. We have higher rankings in society. He doesn't have wealth, he's a poor man. How can we subdue ourselves to his command? How can we follow him, considering that he is less than us in society? Samuel assures to them, he says, you came to me for help. I'm helping you through wahi, and you're opposing me and my decisions? Because if you are, then you're opposing the decisions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now there was a culture, not a culture, but a heritage that existed amongst the Bani Israel. And that was, in the time of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, they say that the sons of Nabi Yusuf, kingship was inherited, it was part of the lineage of Nabi Yusuf. So the sons of Nabi Yusuf, from his lineage you had politicians, you had kings who would look after the kingdom. But from the sons of Lawar, the biblical name of Lawar is Levi. Levi was one of the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam. Yaqub had 12 sons. One of them was Yusuf, Binyamin, and so on and so forth. One of them was Levi. The sons of Levi, from the lineage of Levi, you had prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the prophets would come from the lineage of Lawar, and kings would come from the lineage of Yusuf alayhi salam. This is among some of the narrations mentioned by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Now, some may come forward and say, well, why doesn't prophethood continue from the lineage of Yusuf alayhi salam? The reason being is because, and this is an opinion amongst the ulama, they came forward and they said, when you go back in history, specifically when the sons of Yaqub were jealous of Yusuf alayhi salam, if you remember the point that I made a few nights ago, I said that when you have a prophet of Allah, the moment his mission begins, from the very beginning he will appoint his successor. Yes, the Prophet of Islam appointed Ali alayhi salam from the very beginning, on the first day of his prophethood. Likewise, we mentioned the example of Dawood and Sulaiman. Dawood made it clear to the Bani Israel that Sulaiman will be my inheritor. He will be my prophet. Dawood had many sons. Likewise, Yaqub made it very clear from the beginning that Yusuf will be my inheritor. He will be my successor. Yes, that's why there was a lot of jealousy amongst the brothers towards Yusuf alayhi salam. So what happens according to the story of Nabi Yusuf? They say they took Yusuf alayhi salam outside into the deserts. Yes, they begged their father, they took Yusuf out into the deserts and they planned to kill him. They planned to execute Yusuf alayhi salam. They say one of the brothers of Yusuf, Lawa, he had some affection towards Yusuf alayhi salam. Levi had love for Yusuf. He didn't want to kill Yusuf. But he said to himself, he said, look, if I publicly come out to my brothers and say, don't kill him, if I protect Yusuf, they will kill me as well. If they're willing to kill a prophet of God, who is their own flesh and blood brother, then they wouldn't hesitate killing me. So he comes up with a plan. He convinces his brothers. He says, don't execute Yusuf. Just, throw him in a well, keep him alive. You don't need to kill him, just throw him in a well and then we'll leave him. So they all agreed. They took on the opinions of Levi. They threw him in the well and they abandoned him. And then we all know what happens after. Yes, he becomes a slave and then he's sold off. And then the story of Yusuf alayhi salam continues. But Levi, because of his decision, he saves the life of Yusuf alayhi salam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he liked this decision that Levi made, his affection towards Yusuf, making sure that they didn't execute Yusuf, Allah through his wisdom decided that prophethood continued from his lineage and not from the lineage of Yusuf alayhi salam. Rather, kingship continued from the lineage of Yusuf alayhi salam. As we know, Yusuf eventually becomes a king. And of course, kingship is inherited by his sons. Levi, because he protected the Prophet of God, Allah made sure that prophethood, isma, ma'rifah, continued from his line. Likewise, Abu Talib alayhi salam, because he protected Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, Allah made sure that imama, isma, ma'rifah, wilaya continues from the lineage of Abu Talib alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad. So the Bani Israel came forward and they say, we oppose your decision, Samuel. Why? He said, because Talut is poor. And he's not from the higher echelons of society. How interesting is it that the people of Quraysh, the Quraysh of Mecca used the same argument. When the Prophet of Islam came towards them, they turned to him and they said, "You're a shepherd. What makes you think that you're a prophet of God? You're a shepherd." لولا نزل هذا القرآن على رجل من القريتين عظيم. What a beautiful verse. The ayah of the Quran, what does it explain? That the Quraysh of Mecca, they would turn to one another. Whenever they would hear the recitation of the Holy Quran, it baffled them. It completely baffled them because of the power of the eloquence of the Holy Quran. The balagha of the Quran was so pristine that they, in their power and intellect of poetry, were not able to beat the poetry of the Holy Quran. To such an extent that they would turn to one another and say, why was this Quran revealed to a man like Muhammad? Which meant what? Which meant that they understood the power of the Quran. But their opposition was, why Muhammad? Why did he carry the message of the Holy Quran when we're more deserving of it? Why are we more deserving? Because we're the kings of Quraysh. We are the kings of Mecca. People bow down to us. We are rich. We are famous. We have power. We have influence. The Quran should be in our hands and not in the hands of Muhammad. They say one day Walid ibn Mughira, he turns to Abu Jahl, he says, Ya Abu Jahl, question. He says, what? He says, you believe in the message of Rasulullah? You believe in the message of Muhammad? He says, Wallah, I believe in the message of Muhammad. Abu Jahl himself, very private discussion between the two. He says, I believe in the message of Muhammad. He says, Abu Jahl, I warn you, don't say this to the people in public. He says, don't worry, I won't say it in public. I believe in his message, but that does not mean that I accept his message. The ayah of the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, it begins to speak about kufran, a kafir. Who is a kafir? A kafir is someone who sees the truth. His aql tells him this is the truth. This is haqq, but I don't want it. Take it back. Why? Because your desires are far stronger than your intellect. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu was-salam, Allahumma salli ala. He says the best of human beings are those who control their lives through their aql. But if their desires or their imagination or their anger overpowers their aql, then they are demoted worse than the beasts of this world. If their aql dominates the other factors such as desires and angers and imagination, they are promoted to a level higher than the angels. Abu Jahl, he turns to Walid ibn Mughira, he says, Wallah, I will never accept the message of Muhammad because my lifestyle is threatened. My standard of life, my quality of life is threatened by his message. He says, I see the slaves coming towards his religion. Wallah, I will never sit down in the same gathering where there are slaves. These same slaves who used to come and serve me, I will never sit in the same room as them. I will never share the same platform as them. Says, this is something I can't agree with. Although his message is true, the principles of his message I do not agree with whatsoever. And you find that Abu Jahl, even in his final days, he dies in the state of arrogance. This was sheer arrogance that he opposed the religion of Islam. So you find that this idea that people used to reject the message of Islam simply because the carrier of this message, the mursal, yes, Rasulullah, was of a lower level than they were according to the laws of this world. So the Bani Israel came forward and they said that when you look at Talut, number one, he's poor. Therefore we can't accept his message. We can't accept his authority. Number two, he does not come from the lineage of Lavar, nor does he come from the lineage of Yusuf. He comes from the lineage of Binyamin. Binyamin was the second brother of Yusuf alayhi salam. They say Binyamin was a faqir. Binyamin was poor. He wasn't as rich as Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf was a king. Binyamin was poor. His sons were poor as well. Talut came from the lineage of Binyamin. They said that he comes from a weak lineage, whereas we come from the lineage of Yusuf or Lawar. These two principles, this is the reason why they oppose the leadership of Talut alayhi salam. Samuel made an assurance to them. He says, look, you came to me for help, you asked for help, and I've given you an answer. I've helped you. Allah has chosen Talut over you. Why? Bastatu fil ilmi wal jism. Allah has chosen Talut over you because Allah has given him number one, ilm, and number two, jism, body. They say Talut was huge. He was tonk. He was a heavyweight. Physically, he was very, very strong. These are the two qualities that Talut had, that Allah chose him over everybody else in the kingdom. Ilm, and number two, physical power, physical strength. Therefore, when we turn to the concept of imamah, and khilafah, and the whole discussions of imamah and khilafah, what do we say? We say that Ali ibn Abi Talib is the true wali of Rasulullah. Why? Because number one, he had ilm, and number two, he was physically powerful. Is there any other companion who shares or has higher knowledge than Ali alayhi salam? The Prophet would come forward in public and he would say, Ana Madinatul ilm wa aliyun babuha. These ahadith, the fadail of Ali alayhi salam, they're not just mentioned in our books. When you go dig deeper in the books of our brothers, you'll find these ahadith mentioned in their books as well. He would come forward and he would say, I am the city of knowledge. But to enter the city of knowledge, you have to enter through the gates, and the gates are Ali alayhi salam. Aliyun ma'al haqq wal haqqu ma'a Ali. Aliyun ma'al Qur'an wal Qur'an ma'a Ali. These are all isharat that Ali alayhi salam is what? Sahib al-ilm. Wherever he goes, knowledge follows him. Truth follows him. Ali is not just a normal person. He is the embodiment of truth. Today, if you and I are drowning in ambiguity, we're surrounded by a fog of ambiguity. Hayaran, we're confused. We don't know what the truth is. You turn towards the light. Who are the light? The Ahlul Bayt عليهم السلام. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqin. And be amongst the truthful ones. When we say that Ali is with the truth and Ali is with the Quran, it means that he is the manifestation of truth. Be a follower of his message and do not let go. Rasulullah, famous hadith, Inni tarikum fikum al-thaqalain, kitab Allahi wa itrati ahlul bayt. Follow the Quran and follow my ahlul bayt, because they are the manifestations of truth. Likewise, when you turn towards the bravery and the valor of Ali alayhi salam, is there any other companion greater in bravery than Ali alayhi salam? He is the champion of Badr. He is the champion of Uhud. He is the champion of Khandak. He is the champion of Khaybar. All of these battles in which the Muslims would fail in their missions, Ali would always come forward and be successful. In the battle of Dhat al-Salasil, very interesting battle. Dhat al-Salasil is one of those battles that the historians don't talk about. If you want to do further research of Dhat al-Salasil, there are two versions of this. There is the Sunni version and there is the Shi'i version of this battle. The Sunni version refers to a different battle. It's not the same battle that they indicate. But when you refer to our Mufassirin of the Holy Quran, our tafsir of the Holy Quran, they say that there were 12,000 army men who came and gathered together. Mushrikeen, kuffar. They said, we will not leave until we kill, number one, Rasulullah, and number two, Ali ibn Abi Talib. Even the Mushrikeen realized that. They realized who the second man was after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. They said, they came forward and they said, we will not leave until we kill Ali as well as the Holy Prophet of Islam. All the other companions, leave them. But these two, we have to kill in battle. Jibreel descends, he tells Rasulullah, he says, 12,000 army men have gathered in Wadi al-Yabis, in the valley of al-Yabis. He says, Ya Rasulullah, you have to confront them before they confront you. If they come towards the city of Medina, they will wipe each and every one of you. Rasulullah sends Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr goes, he fails, he comes back. He sends Umar. Umar goes, he fails, he comes back. He says, Ya Ali, go. Take your legion of 400. 400 men against 12,000. The Imam alayhi salam goes. When he goes, he launches an attack just after Fajr and he subdues an army of 12,000. Over a single morning. The ayat of the Holy Quran is revealed. وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا فَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا فَأَثَرْنَ بِهِ نَقْعًا فَوَسَطْنَ بِهِ جَمْعًا. Ali alayhi salam, when he subdues an army of 12,000, Allah awards him. Allah pays a tribute towards him through the revelation of Surah Al-Adiyat. So you find that one of the greatest companions who was known for his bravery and his valor was none other than Ali alayhi salam. What other proofs do we need? Talut is chosen because of his ilm and because of his physical strength. Ali alayhi salam had ilm and he had physical strength. Based on the principles of the Holy Quran. Based on the principles of the Holy Quran. we prove the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Beyond this, Samuel turns towards his people and he says, I haven't chosen Talut over you. Allah has chosen Talut over you. What a beautiful point that Samuel makes. He says, I haven't had any authority in this affair. I follow the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah revealed to me, I'm simply a messenger. Allah has chosen Talut over you. When we speak about Imama and Khilafah, what do we say about Imama? We say that Allah chose Ali alayhi salam. It's not the people who chose Ali alayhi salam. Allah chose Adam alayhi salam. Allah chose Ibrahim alayhi salam. Allah chose Musa alayhi salam. Allah chose Isa alayhi salam. Allah chose Talut. Allah chose Rasulullah. Likewise, after the Prophet of Islam, Allah chose Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. This is not an affair that goes into the hands of the Muslimin. It's not an affair that goes into the hands of the people. There's a very interesting hadith. 70 ulama, 70 great ulama, in the time of Bani Israel, they came to Nabi Musa alayhi salam. They said, Ya Musa, take us towards the mountain, the cave that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to experience that spirituality. So Nabi Musa alayhi salam, he takes these 70 ulama towards the mountain. When he enters the cave, they said to him, Ya Musa, we want to see your Lord. Imagine how weak their aqidah was. That they asked Musa alayhi salam, we want to see your Lord. Ulama, we're talking about 7 great personalities. Ulama from the Bani Israel. They turned to Musa and they said, Musa, we want to see your Lord. Musa alayhi salam, imagine his confusion. He's like, what? You're meant to be the best of the best. You're meant to be the best of the crop from the Bani Israel, and you're asking me to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The 70 great ulama of Bani Israel, their aqidah was weak. That's why the responsibility of choosing a leader should not be in the hands of the people. It should be in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because mankind is capable of making mistakes, but Allah is never capable of making mistakes. Allah chose Talut, Allah chose Ali ibn Abi Talib. You know what's interesting when you look at the discussions of how a caliph is chosen? Just Google this. How is a caliph chosen? How is a human being chosen as a caliph? There are 3 ways, according to the opinions of the Ahlul Sunnah. Number 1, when the people of respect, when the people, great personalities, trustable personalities get together and they appoint one person. This is how a caliph is chosen. Number 2, through military power. If a person reaches the stages of a caliphate through military power by the sword, he can officially legitimately become a caliph. And number 3, when the previous caliph chooses the new caliph. These are the 3 ways in which a caliph becomes a caliph according to Muslim thought. When you ask the question, why these 3 methods? They say, well, number 1, Abu Bakr was chosen by a handful of people. Trustworthy people, they came and they chose Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr appointed Umar ibn al-Khattab directly. So that's the second way. Uthman was chosen by a group of specialists. Ali alayhi salam was chosen by a group of specialists. Muawiyah came and became a caliph through military power. So these are the 3 ways in which a person can become a caliph. When you ask the question to our brothers, how can a person become a caliph? They say, go back to the sunnah of the Sahaba. Then you'll understand how a person can become a caliph. When you ask a Shia, how can a person become an imam or a caliph? We say, go back to the sunnah or the Qur'an. Go back to the Qur'an. What does the Qur'an say? The Qur'an says that each and every divine personality is chosen by Allah. There is consistency within our madhab. You won't find the same consistency outside of our madhab. They follow the sunnah of the Sahaba, which can differ from one generation to the other. Whereas the sunnah of the madhab of the Shia, when it comes to imamah, is consistent. The 1st is chosen by Allah, the 7th is chosen by Allah, the 8th is chosen by Allah, the 12th is chosen by Allah. Absolute consistency between the 1st and the 12th. Samuel said to them, Allah has chosen Talut over you. This is not in my hands. They came to Samuel and they said, are you sure this is part of the revelation of Allah? He said, yes, absolutely. Talut was chosen by Allah. They asked him again, are you sure? Maybe you've made a mistake here and there. He says, no, revelation, wahi, there is no greater knowledge than the knowledge of revelation. Allah has chosen Talut over you. Maybe your connection, maybe your reception wasn't perfect at that time. Maybe you didn't have full bars at the time. He says, Baba, Talut, Allah chose him over you. Finally, they came to him and they said, Samuel, we don't believe you. Give us evidence that Allah chose Talut over you. Imagine the level of opposition. The level of opposition against the Prophet. Give us evidence that Allah chose Talut over us. Then the ayat of the Holy Quran begins to speak about the Tabut of Musa. Now, very interesting question arises. What is the Tabut of Musa? What's Tabut in our language? Tabut is like a wooden box. In our culture, usually it's in reference to a coffin, yes? When a mayyit is placed in the coffin, we say that this is a Tabut. But in reality, according to the Arabic language, it's in reference to a wooden box. What is the wooden box of Musa? They say that when Fir'aun was going around killing the infants, Musa's mother took the baby, the infant, and placed him in a wooden box. And she then let this wooden box go down the river. Eventually it comes into the house of Fir'aun, and Fir'aun adopts Musa alayhi salam. This wooden box, it wasn't discarded. Musa kept it. Musa kept it, and it became part of his legacy. It became part of his heritage. When Musa passed away, this wooden box, this tabut, was then inherited by Yusha ibn Nun. It became a symbol. Whoever inherited the tabut of Musa alayhi salam from the Bani Israel were the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Yusha ibn Nun inherited this tabut, and his successor inherited the tabut, until one prophet after another inherited it. They say two men from the Zaydiyah came towards Imam Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. They entered the presence of the sixth Imam and they said, we've heard that you're calling yourself an Imam, a wasi of Rasulullah. The Imam says, yes, absolutely. They said, Yabna Rasulullah, give us evidence that you're the Imam. You see, the Imam alayhi salam, this wasn't the first time he was asked the question. The same question can be asked by different people. Sometimes the ulama will ask the Imam alayhi salam, prove to me that you're the Imam. Sometimes a layman will ask the Imam, prove to me that you're an Imam. The answer is always different. Based on the intellectual capacity of the person, the Imam would respond with what they are capable of. If an alim asks, then the Imam would sit down, he will go through the riwayat, he will go through the Quran, he would answer all of the tough questions that they have. And they would know that, yes, this is indeed the Imam. When a layman asks, the Imam gives them a very sathi answer, very shallow answer, something that's sufficient for that person. These two individuals of Zaydiyah, from the Zaydiyah madhab, when they asked the Imam alayhi salam, the Imam said to them, not an intellectual discussion by the way, the Imam does not give them a heavyweight answer. The Imam says to them, he looks at them, he says, do you see this ring? They say, yes. He says, this is the ring of Sulaiman alayhi salam. I inherited it. He says, do you see the staff? He says, yes. He says, this is the staff of Musa alayhi salam. I inherited it. He says, do you see this shirt? He says, yes. He says, this is the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam, which was given to him by his father Yaqub, which was given to him by his father Ishaq, which was given to him by his father Ibrahim alayhi salam, which was given to him by Jibra'il alayhi salam from the heavens, the day when Ibrahim was thrown into the fire. Ibrahim turns to Allah, he says, Ya Allah, I seek assistance. They are going to throw me in the fire. Jibra'il comes down, he says, Ya Ibrahim. Jibra'il says, Ya Ibrahim, wear this shirt, it will protect you from the fire. Ya nar kuni bardan was salama. The fire becomes cool and tranquil for Ibrahim. This shirt is then passed down from one generation to the other. He then turns to these two people, he says, do you see this tabut? He says, yes, this is the tabut of Musa, I've inherited it. In Ziyarat al-Waritha, what do we say? Ya Aba Abdullah, Assalamu alayki ya Waritha, ya Waritha, ya Waritha. You are the inheritor of Adam, you are the inheritor of Musa, you are the inheritor of Ibrahim, you are the inheritor of Isa. One of the interpretations of our ulama is that they don't just inherit knowledge and ma'rifah, they inherit physical things as well. And whoever possesses these physical aspects, it proves the legitimacy of their imamah. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, I inherited the Taboot of Musa alayhi salam. The Taboot of Musa, according to the ayah of the Holy Quran, was a source of sakina, was a source of peace and tranquility for the Bani Israel. It was a source of power. Whenever they would go into battle, they would carry this Taboot of Musa alayhi salam. As long as they had an association and possession of this Taboot, Allah would give them victory in the battlefield. Allah would give them power over the enemies. But as I mentioned earlier, when they moved away from the religion of Islam, when they moved away from Allah's Sharia, Allah punishes them. He removes their bounties that He favored them with. That Taboot is taken away from them. They are subjugated by their enemies, and these enemies take the Taboot away from the Bani Israel. When the Taboot is taken, that source of sakina, that source of strength and barakah and rahmah is taken away from them as well. They said to Samuel, give us evidence that Talut is a king over us. Allah sends an angel. Go take the Taboot of Musa and give it to Talut. The angel, according to the ayah of the Holy Quran, they carried the Taboot of Musa alayhi salam. They came towards the city, they came towards Talut, and they presented him with the Taboot of Musa alayhi salam. When the Bani Israel saw that the Taboot returned to Talut alayhi salam, they then came forward and they said, now we submit to the idea, to the fact that Talut is a king over us. That's when the legitimacy to his kingship came into materialization. So Talut now becomes the king over the Bani Israel after so much opposition. Everyone subdued and accepted his kingship. Now, they say that Talut was a very sharp person, especially when it came to military affairs. He picked up all of the different strategies very quickly. Someone who was just a farm boy becomes a leader, becomes a very strong general of his army. His military knowledge becomes very strong, it's reinforced. He trains many and he tries to recruit many soldiers. He has to now face an opposition, a very strong army of the enemy. They say, according to some narrations, he sends a message to a man by the name of Asi. Asi was home. Asi, they say, he had 10 sons. One of his sons was Dawood alayhi salam. David, the Prophet Dawood, was one of his sons. So he sends a letter to Asi. He says, I want all of your sons to engage in battle, to join my army. So Dawood alayhi salam now comes into the scene and he joins the legion of Talut alayhi rahmah. Now, Talut appoints a day and a time, and he says that on this day we will proceed towards the enemy lines and we will confront them and we will engage in battle. So on that day, they all went and proceeded towards the enemy lines, towards the empire of the enemies. Talut, before they began the journey, he said, look, it's going to be a trek. It's going to be a very difficult trek. When you reach the lands, you'll come across this place, this valley. When you cross this valley, it'll be very hot. The sun will be scorching. The heat will be unbearable. Each and every single of you will be thirsty. But you will come across a river. When you come across this river, you have no ijazah, you have no permission to drink from this river. He says there are 3 types of people that will emerge from amongst you. The first of you will not drink from the river. These individuals, for huwa minni, we mentioned this, yeah? For huwa minni, meaning that he is from me, he'll be part of my revolution, he'll be part of my movement. Those of you who drink from the river, you will be sent back home, you won't be from amongst my revolution. And the third, they will drink, but they will drink only a little, something that, a few sips for example, to kill the quench of the thirst. This third part, they will be part of my army as well. But those of you who drink and drink and drink and drink until you fill your bellies with water, I'll send you back home. They said, okay. They began their journey. They passed the valleys. Yes, they came towards the river. They, each and every single one of them, these companions of Talut alayhi rahmah, they faced thirst. They witnessed thirst. But majority of them drank from the river. 60,000 from amongst them drank from the river. Only a small percent did not drink. And even then, small percent from amongst them drank only a little. When Talut caught up to them, and he said to them that I've just seen majority of you drink from the river, He was not happy with their decision. So he said to them, pack your bags, go home. Said Talut, what do you mean go home? With the small amount of people who haven't drunk, there is no way that you'll be able to confront an army of hundreds of thousands. You'll need our help. He says, I don't need your help. Go home, pack your bags and go home. He says, how can a small number, how can a small number oppose a larger number? He says it's not about the number, it's not about the quantity, rather it's about the quality. I cannot have individuals in my army who are not able to control their desires. If they're not able to control their desires, I don't know if you'll be able to give your life in battle. So I don't trust you in that affair. Pack your bags and go home. They all left, they went back to the city. The small percent that was there, they then proceeded towards the enemy lines. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they say that when he left the city of Medina, there were a few followers with him. He enters the city of Mecca. Again, people there, they began to follow his message. They were in line with his revolutionary thoughts and mission. When he left the city of Mecca to go towards Kufa, they say the Imam had quite a few followers. Yes, a few hundred followers. Then all of a sudden, the news of the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil came towards Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. You see, the people, they had this revolutionary spirit. They said, look, Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, if he's going to stand against Yazid ibn Muawiyah, that's the high seat. If he's successful, we will go down in history as those who supported Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. If Abu Abdullah alayhi salam is successful and we're alive, then he will turn around and he will reward us. Some gold and silver will come our way. Some of us will become governors. Yes, we'll have certain political status within the community. So they all joined the movement of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. But when the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil came towards them, they realized that, hold on a second, Kufa, they're no longer willing to support Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. If Kufa is not under the authority of Abu Abdullah, there is no way that he will beat Yazid ibn Muawiyah. So they all abandoned Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. Until there was a handful of number of individuals. Likewise here, Talut sent majority of his followers home. Then the small number proceeded towards the battlefield. When they confronted the army, they say a man by the name of Jalut, a monster. You know how we've heard of the stories of Marhab, how we've heard the stories of Amr ibn al-As, Amr ibn al-Wad in the battle of Khandaq, yes, and how he challenged the Muslims. Likewise, Jalut was no different from them. He came forward and he challenged the Muslims. He said, which from amongst you will come and fight me? They say a young man, Dawood, comes forward. Dawood comes forward. Skinny, frail, fragile. From the apparent, he looked fragile. He said, I'll come, I'll oppose you. They all laughed. Jalut laughs. What, you're going to fight me? He said, yes, I'll fight you. They say Dawood took a stone, one pebble. He took a stone and he threw it into the face of Talut. When it hit and struck the face of Jalut, when it struck the face of Jalut, Jalut fell on the floor dead. He was killed. When Jalut was killed, remember Jalut is the general of the army. When the head is cut, the body is useless, isn't it? When their leader was dead, when their leader was executed, they say that it dissipated the entire army. The entire army went into chaos. They said such a young man, such a frail, weak man from the apparent was able to kill our greatest ranking general, the strongest from amongst us. Imagine what they can do to us. All of a sudden the army, the hundreds of thousands that opposed the Muslims of the time, they all dissipated. It fell apart, it broke apart. They say Dawood alayhi salam becomes a champion in this battle. And then later Allah gives him mulk and he becomes a king. And then he has a son Sulaiman and the story continues. But the point is, Dawood alayhi salam, he wasn't huge like Jalut. But when he threw the stone, there was the spirit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it, in that throw. The strength of Allah was with Dawood alayhi salam. Why did Dawood go and challenge Jalut and accept the challenge of Jalut? The same reason why Ali ibn Abi Talib would go into battle every single time. The Holy Prophet did not send Ali alayhi salam to just let him show off in front of the people. It was to show the people that, look, there is a skill that this young man has. There is a reason why I keep sending him towards battle. It's because he is my successor. The reason why Dawood alayhi salam fights Jalut, knowing that Talut himself can fight Jalut, is to show the people that after Samuel, I inherit prophethood. It was to embrace and announce to the people that I am the new religious leader after the Prophet of Islam. It was a message, a clear announcement to the people. Likewise, you find that the small quantity of people that challenged the greater numbers was again replicated and repeated in history many times throughout. In Badr, 313 against 1100. You find, for example, in the succeeding battles after, and of course what happened in Karbala as well. In Karbala, you find that a handful of people confronted a majority. And amongst them were children who were part of the 72 that stood alongside Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. On the night of Ashura, the companions all gave allegiance to Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. One of them would come forward, the likes of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, and he would say, if I was to be cut into 1,000 pieces, revived and cut again into 1,000 pieces, if it's for you, Ya Abu Abdullah, I don't mind. Qasim, the son of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, in the night of Ashura, he turns to his uncle, he says, death. I want death. He says, Ya Qasim, why would you want death? He says, death to me is sweeter than honey, O my uncle. Imagine such words coming from a young man. Imagine his iman, that he's willing to give his entire life for the sake of the message of Islam. 60,000 in the time of Talut were not willing to give their lives. They weren't willing to stop drinking from the river. You think that they were willing to give their lives for the message of Islam? A young child, the son of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he says, forget the water, I will give my life for your message. Look at the likeness of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He enters the river. 3 days, scorching heat, he's not drunk a single sip. The water, he's surrounded by it. He takes the water in his hands, he throws it away. Not until my Mawla drinks first. We talk about the valor and the strength of Abbas, talk about the spirituality of Abbas alayhi salam, that he controls his desires and not drink from the water. Qasim, he turns to his uncle, he says, my uncle, death is sweeter to me than honey. On the 10th of Muharram, they say, the narrations are beautiful. When it comes to the whole masa'ib of Qasim, the narrations are beautiful. He hears his uncle cry out, هَلْ مِن نَاصِرٍ يَنْصُرْنَا هَلْ مِن مُعِينٍ يُعِينُنَا هَلْ مِن مُغِيثٍ يُغِيثُنَا. The Imam cries out. He says, is there any helper to help us? Anyone who can aid us? Anyone who can support us? Qasim, he can no longer bear the patience. He comes running to his uncle. He says, Ya Ammi, let me go into the battlefield. Let me give my life for your message, oh my uncle. The Imam, when he sees Qasim's face, he begins to cry. He begins to lament. He says, Ya Qasim, why do you hasten towards your death? You're still a child. Jihad is not wajib for you. He says, oh my uncle, I cannot bear to see you without any supporters. He says, Qasim, anta ya Qasim, wadi'ati min akhi. He says, you're an amana from my brother. I cannot let you go and give your life for this message. You're still young. He keeps denying Qasim ijazah to go towards the battlefield. They say Qasim comes to his mother crying. He says, my uncle won't send me towards the battlefield. He says, Ya Qasim, take this letter towards your uncle. I've been holding it for you. It's a letter from your father, Al-Hasan. When Qasim reads the letter, he takes it to his uncle. He says, Ya Ammi, oh my uncle, read this letter, it's for you. He reads this letter, it's from the handwriting of his brother Al-Hasan, Imam Al-Hasan. He speaks to his son Qasim. He says, oh my son, Ya Bunayya, إذا وجدت عمك مظلوما وأطشانا وغريبا. He says, oh my son, if you find your uncle oppressed and a stranger in the lands, when you find your uncle thirsty, asking for help, give your life for his message. When Abu Abdullah reads this letter, he then calls out to the women. He says, Ya Ramla, Ya Zainab, Ya Layla, Ya Sakina, come and bid farewells to your nephew Qasim. Come bid farewell to Qasim. This is the last time you will see him. They say each of the ladies, they came, they embraced Qasim, they bid farewell to him. Zainab sat down alongside Qasim and said to him, Ya Qasim, you remind me of my brother Al-Hassan. You look so much like your father Al-Hassan. She cries, she sheds tears for Qasim. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam then dresses him with his armor. Abu Fadl al-Abbas lifts him and places him on his horse. They say Qasim was short, he couldn't mount the horse himself. Then he proceeds towards the battlefield. When he goes towards battle, they say that Qasim begins to cry out. He says, He says, إن تنكروني فأنا نجل الحسن سبت النبي المصطفى والمؤتمن هذا الحسين كالأسير المرتهن بين أناس لا سقوا صوب المزن. His battle cry is very beautiful and eloquent. He then engages in battle. They say there was a man by the name of Umar ibn Sa'ad. He came behind Qasim and struck him on his head. Qasim fell from his horse. He then turns to his uncle. He says, Ya Amma adrikni. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they say he rushes towards the battlefield like a lion would pounce upon its prey. He came towards Umar ibn Sa'ad and strikes him and wounds him. They say that when Umar falls onto the ground, he cries for help. The enemies then came rushing towards Umar to save him from Abu Abdullah. But what happens? The body of Qasim gets stuck under the hooves of the horses. They began trampling on the body of Qasim. It shreds his body into pieces. They drag his body from the right to the left and from the left to the right. When the dust settles, Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he comes towards the body of his nephew. He sits alongside it. He begins to wipe the blood from his face. He then carries the body of Qasim back to the tents of the women. Hamid ibn Muslim narrates, he says, when I saw Abu Abdullah carry the body of Qasim, his feet were being dragged alongside the floor, on the floor. Imagine how his body was stretched out, that his body was being dragged on the sands of Karbala. There's a poet, very beautiful lines of poetry. He says, Jabba umaddad bayna khuta قاعد عيدهم يا ويلي وهم موتى بس ما سمعين النسوان صوتا أجت رملة سيح الله أكبر. They say he takes the body of Qasim, he places it alongside the body of his son Ali al-Akbar. He then sits between Qasim and Ali and he begins to lament. On one side his son, on the other side the son of his brother. He's crying, he's lamenting. But the women are waiting for him to finish so that the women can come and pay tribute towards Ali al-Akbar and Qasim.
but they don't have the patience to wait anymore. They come towards Zainab and they say, Ya Zainab, tell Abu Abdullah to leave so that we can come see the body of our sons. Zainab, she then comes towards Abu Abdullah. She says, Ya Abu Abdullah, the women are waiting. They want to come see the body of Qasim and Ali. Abu Abdullah, he barely manages to get on his feet. Then he leaves. When he leaves, Ramla comes inside. She comes towards her son Qasim. She embraces his body. She cries out, Allah, Allahu Akbar.
إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة.